If we're going to build a front end, we might as well do it right. And in this video, we're going to add an auto scrolling feature. So if a new message comes in, it is visible inside of the messages panel. Now, right away, this is not a problem. I type in A, I hit enter, and it shows up. But as we get further down the list, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, you see the messages start to disappear down the bottom of the bar. Now I can indeed scroll down to see the most recent messages, but it would be nice if I'm automatically scrolled to the most recent message. So if a new message comes in like 1, 2, 3, I'm automatically brought to the bottom. Now, obviously, if someone does scroll up to read an old message, we're going to want to keep them there. We're not going to want to scroll them to the bottom. That would be just as annoying as not being able to see the new messages in the first place, which means that we're going to go ahead and calculate a threshold. If someone can see that last message, like I can here, I can see the U in user, we're going to go ahead and scroll them to the bottom when a new message comes in. If I'm above that message, like I am here, we're going to go ahead and leave them alone. There's no reason to scroll them to the bottom if they're digging through the archives. Now, in order to do that, we are going to have to run a calculation, grabbing a few properties, mostly the height properties of various things. Now, to talk about those height properties and figure out exactly how we're going to run this calculation, I've put together a really short set of slides. Let's go ahead and dive right in. To illustrate exactly how we're going to run this calculation, let's take a look at the following example. We have this light purple box. It's taller than the dark purple one. This is the entire messages container. It's probably going to contain way more messages than we can actually see in the browser. This dark purple area, this is what we actually see. As we scroll down, the dark purple area is going to move down to the bottom, and as we scroll up, it's going to shift up to the top. Now we have access to 3 height properties that are going to let us make the calculations necessary to determine whether or not we should scroll down a user. These are the following. First up, scroll height. This is the entire height of our messages container, regardless of how much is actually visible inside of the browser. This means that if we have messages before and after what we can see, they are still going to be accounted for in scroll height. Next up, we have client height. This is the visible height container. And finally, we have scroll top. This is the number of pixels we've scrolled down into the purple container, which would be just this area here. Now, in the current situation, what do we want to do? We want to do nothing. The user really isn't scrolled that far down. It would be a burden to them if they got brought to the bottom every time a new message came in. In the next scenario, we scroll down just a little bit more. The scroll top has increased, the client height has stayed the same, and so has the scroll height. Now, if we keep going down the list, eventually, we're going to get to the very bottom. Currently, we should do nothing, but when we get to the bottom, the calculations look a little different. Here, you can see the scroll top value, which is the space above what we can see, plus the client height value is identical to scroll height. And this is going to be the basics of our equation. If the scroll top plus the client height equals the scroll height, we do want to scroll the user down when a new message comes in because we know they're at the very bottom of the panel. So in this situation, what should we do? We should scroll to the bottom when a new message comes in. Now there is one slight little quirk. We are going to have that message already added, so we're going to take into account the new message height in our calculation, adding up scroll top, client height, and message height, comparing that value to the scroll height. Using this, we will once again be able to scroll the user to the bottom. Let's go ahead and wire this up in Atom. Now that we know how we're going to run that calculation, let's go ahead and actually do it over inside of index.js. We're going to make a new function that's going to do all this heavy lifting for us. It's going to determine whether or not we should scroll the user to the bottom depending on their position. Let's make a function right here at the top of index.js. It's not going to take any arguments, and we're going to go ahead and call this function scroll to bottom. And we're going to call scroll to bottom every time we add a new message to the chat area, which means we need to do it twice, once inside of new message and once inside of new location message. Right here, I can call scroll to bottom, passing in no arguments, and I'll do the same thing down below when we append a new location message. Scroll to bottom. Awesome. Now all we need to do is wire up this function to 1, determine if we should scroll them to the bottom, and 2, actually scroll them to the bottom if it's necessary. To get started, we are going to select the messages container, creating a new variable to store that in. We're going to actually be creating quite a few variables to run our calculation, so I'm going to add 2 comments, selectors, and heights. This is going to help us just break up the long list of variables. Right here, we can make a variable. We'll call this variable messages, and we're going to set messages equal to a jQuery selector call. We're going to select all elements with an ID equal to messages, which is just R1. Now that we have messages in place, we can focus on getting those heights. We are going to go ahead and fetch client height, and scroll top. First up, we can make a variable called client height, setting that equal to messages, and then we're going to call a prop method, which gives us a cross-browser way to fetch a property. This is a jQuery alternative to doing it without jQuery. This makes sure it works across all browsers, regardless of what they call the prop. Right here, we're going to go ahead and provide, inside of quotes, client height to fetch that client height prop, and we're going to do the exact same thing 2 more times for the other 2 values. Scroll top is going to get set equal to messages dot prop, fetching the prop, scroll uppercase T top, and last but not least, scroll height. A new variable called scroll height will store that value, and we're going to set it equal to messages dot prop, passing in the prop we want to fetch, scroll height. Awesome. Now that we have this in place, we can get started with our calculation. We want to figure out if the scroll top plus the client height is greater than or equal to the scroll height. If it is, then we want to go ahead and scroll the user to the bottom because we know they're already near the bottom. If client height plus scroll top is greater than or equal to scroll height. Now, if this is the case, then we are going to go ahead and do something. For now, we'll just use console.log to print a little message to the screen. Right here, we'll just print should scroll. Awesome. Now, our calculation is not quite complete. Since we are running this function after we append the new message, we do need to take that into account also. And as we saw over inside of Atom, if we can see that last message, we do want to scroll them to the bottom. If I'm further up the list, we won't scroll them. But if I'm pretty close to the bottom, a few pixels up above, we should scroll them to the bottom because that's most likely what they want. Now, in order to get this done, we have to take into account the height of that new message and the height of the previous message. Right here inside of Atom, we're going to go ahead and get that done by first up adding a selector. We're going to make a variable called new message, and this is going to store the selector for the last list item, the one that was just added before the call to scroll to bottom. I'm going to use jQuery to get this done, but instead of creating a new selector, we can actually build off of our previous one, messages, and we're going to call its children method. This lets you write a selector specific to the children of the message, which means that we have all of our list items. So we could select our list items. In another context, maybe we want to select all the children that are paragraphs. In our case, though, we're going to select the list items that are the last child using this last child modifier. Right here, we now have just one item, the last list item in the list, and we can go ahead and get its height by making a variable called new message height, and we're going to set that equal to new message, and we're going to call its inner height method. This is going to calculate the height of the message, taking into account the padding that we've also applied via CSS. Now we need to take into account the height of the second to last message as well. To do that, we're going to create a variable called last message height. I promise this is the last variable we're going to make, and we'll set it equal to new message, and we're going to call the prev method. This moves us to the previous child. So if we were at the last list item, we are now at the second to last list item, and we can get its height by once again calling inner height just like this. Now we can account for both of these values inside of our if statement as well. We're going to add them up right here, new message height. And we're also going to add the last message height, taking that into account as we make our calculation. Now that our calculation is complete, we can actually test out that things are working as expected. We should see, should scroll, when we should scroll. Over inside of the browser, I'm going to go ahead and give things a refresh, and I'm also going to open up the developer tools so we can view our console.log statement. You'll notice on smaller screens, the styles remove the sidebar. Here you can see new message.prev inner height is not a function. Over inside of Atom, I accidentally added a lowercase h. Pretty easy fix there. I can save those changes, go back into the browser, give the page a refresh, and we should be good to go. Now I'm going to hit enter a few times. Obviously, we shouldn't be able to send empty messages, but we can for the moment. And you can see that should scroll is printing. It's not actually going to scroll because the height of our messages container doesn't actually exceed the height of the browser space given to it, but it does indeed pass the condition. Now, as we get down further and messages start to drop off the bottom of the screen, you'll notice this count stops going up. The count incremented every time should scroll printed, but now it stays at 12 even though I'm adding new messages down below. In this case, we can scroll back down to the bottom and add a new message, ABC. This should cause the browser to scroll. We're kind of near the bottom. When I do it, should scroll increments to 13, which is fantastic. If I scroll up to the top of the list and type 123 and hit enter, should scroll does not increment to 14, which would be correct. We do not want to scroll a user to the bottom if they're up at the very top. Now, the only thing left to do is actually scroll a user when necessary. That's going to happen over inside of our if statement. We can remove our should scroll console.log call, and we're going to replace it with a call to messages.scroll top, which is the jQuery method for setting that scroll top value. And we're going to set it to the scroll height, which is the total height of the container, which means that we're going to be moving to the bottom of the messages area. Over inside of Google Chrome, we can now refresh the page to grab that latest index.js file, and I'm just going to hold the enter key for a little bit. And as you see, we are scrolling down the list automatically. If I add a new message, boom, it shows up right there. If I'm up near the top and a new message comes in, like 123, I do not scroll down the list, which is correct. Now, if I'm not quite at the bottom, but I'm pretty close, like I would be right here, and a new message comes in, you can see I am scrolled to the bottom, but if I'm a little past that last message, like I would be right here, we're not going to get scrolled to the bottom, which is exactly what we wanted. This is all happening because of our calculations. Let's wrap this up with a commit over inside of the terminal. If we run git status, we see we just have one changed file. I can use git commit am to make a commit. Scroll to bottom if user is close to bottom. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and push that up to GitHub, and this is considered a wrap on the first part of this project. We have a basic chat application in place. From here on out, the goal is going to be to add chat rooms and names. So I go to a sign up page, I enter the room I'd like to join and the name I'd like to use, then I get brought to a chat page like this one, but only for that specific room. So if there's two rooms, users in room 1 are not going to be able to talk to users in room 2 and vice versa. That's all coming up next, so stay tuned. I'm super excited to get to it. I will see you then.